The snow looked clean enough to be harmless. It wasn't. Not today. Daylight poured into the basin so hard it made edges disappear. Rock spines softened, trees flattened into dark smudges. Even the ridgeline the patrol had used as a guide turned into a pale seam stitched across white. Wind scraped across the surface and carried sound away in thin, cruel ribbons. When you exhaled, your breath didn't billow like smoke. It simply vanished, swallowed by glare. The patrol was pinned on the wrong side of a frozen ridge, crouched in a shallow depression that wasn't deep enough to hide a helmet and wasn't wide enough to spread out. 6 people pressed tight, shoulders bumping in the snow, as if proximity could substitute for cover. "Higher, this is Rook Actual." Staff Sergeant Rourke's voice cracked into his handset, then died in static so thick it felt like a physical thing. He slapped the radio, twisted the knob, tried again. "Rook Actual, we are in contact, grid." A stutter of broken syllables replied. Half a word, then nothing. The net wasn't just dead. It was being strangled. Rourke's jaw flexed. He switched to the backup set, the one that lived wrapped in plastic at the bottom of his ruck as insurance against bad luck. He clicked it on. The screen blinked once, then went black. "Dead," muttered Torres, the grenadier, like the radio had taken a personal vow. Across the depression, the machine gunner, Pike, squeezed a burst anyway. The weapon answered with a furious rattle, then coughed as the barrel heat climbed. The sound echoed once in the open bowl and got shredded by wind. Enemy fire responded immediately, disciplined, clipped, not angry. It didn't search. It corrected. Rounds snapped across the lip of the depression in a line that forced heads down and kept them down. Anyone who tried to shift got a sharp reminder inches from their face. They weren't being shot at. They were being shaped. "Funnel," Rourke said to no one. He didn't need to explain. Everyone could feel it, the way the bursts nudged them into staying exactly where they were, exactly where the enemy wanted them. On Rourke's left, the designated marksman, Ellis, lay on his side with his shoulders soaked through. The snow under him had turned from white to pink to a darker, ugly red. He held the wound with a gloved hand that was already slipping. His rifle sat useless beside him, sling buried under powder. "Pressure," hissed Doc Madsen, one knee in the blood, both hands working. "Don't lift it. Don't." Ellis's lips were gray. He tried to nod and couldn't. Rourke's eyes flicked up over the rim for half a second, a quick scan he'd done 1,000 times in other valleys and other winters. He saw what he expected. Rock above, tree lean far, a gentle slope that would have been peaceful if it wasn't full of people trying to kill them. Then the first mortar round landed. It hit far enough away that the blast felt like a shove rather than a punch. Snow puffed up in a white mushroom that the wind immediately tore apart. A ranging round. A question. The second landed closer, downhill and left, a subtle correction. The third closer still. "They're walking it," Torres said, voice flat. "They've got eyes." "Drone," Pike muttered, craning his head like he could hear it. "Or a spotter." Overhead, faint as a mosquito and twice as hateful, came a buzz that didn't belong to wind or birds. The patrol couldn't see it at first. Bright sky swallowed it. Then it flashed, a tiny dark cross, gliding in a patient circle. Rourke lifted his carbine and tracked it for the width of a heartbeat. The glare fought him. The drone drifted. He fired a short burst anyway. The rounds went nowhere. The drone kept its lazy loop, unbothered, like it already knew he couldn't hit it. Another mortar thumped in. Snow rained into the depression. Ellis flinched and groaned. Doc covered him with her body for an instant, then went back to pressure and breath counting. Rourke looked at his watch, then at the basin, then at the ridgeline they'd come from, now a shining trap of their own footprints. There was a window for extraction. There always was. But windows in mountains didn't stay open. 5 minutes, he said. He didn't need to raise his voice. Nobody was talking. Talking wasted oxygen. "If we're not moving in 5, the bird won't come." "You still think a bird is coming?" Pike asked, not sarcastic, just making sure he wasn't the only one who understood how bad it had gotten. Rourke didn't answer. He couldn't, because he didn't know. His comms were dead. His plan was being rewritten by other people. Enemy movement flickered on the far tree lean. dark shapes sliding between trunks. Higher up on the rocks, he saw a glint, then a head, then nothing. Flankers. They were patient. They weren't rushing to finish the job because the job wasn't just killing. The machine gun stuttered again, the barrel too hot, the feed dragging. Pike slapped it, swore under his breath, tried to keep it alive. The patrol's ammo wasn't measured in magazines anymore. It was counted by handfuls. Another mortar landed closer. The depression shook. Snow filled mouths and eyes. Torres gagged it out and blinked hard. Why aren't they pushing? Doc said, voice tight. If they had us, they'd. They're waiting, Rourke said. He felt it in his bones. For a signal. Something. Silence dropped like a curtain. Not the quiet of safety. An unnatural pause, a held breath. Enemy fire stopped all at once, as if someone had lifted a finger. Even the drone's buzz seemed to fade, though maybe that was just Rourke's brain trying to hear anything that made sense. Rourke raised his head a fraction, eyes scanning the ridges, searching for the reason. The basin was bright and still and impossible. Wind hissed over snow and made everything sound far away. Torres swallowed. This is bad. Pike's voice came thin. We got one more belt, Sarge. From the right, near the edge of the depression, someone let out a short, bitter laugh. She's not even here. Rourke glanced that way, irritated by the timing. It was Klein, the oldest of them, a man who'd seen enough winter valleys to distrust all of them. He was staring at the empty slope ahead, like it had personally offended him. What are you talking about? Torres asked. Klein didn't take his eyes off the glare. Just thinking if we had our ghost. But she's declared dead, so we get to die the normal way. No one answered. Not because they agreed, because in that moment, the words landed like a stone in a pocket. Declared dead. A ghost. Someone who wasn't there. Then it happened. A single crack, sharp, isolated, too clean to be part of the chaos. It came from low, wrong, from a place no one was looking because there was nothing there but snow. The sound cut through the basin like a knife. Half a second later, something on the far side of the bowl folded, too small to make out clearly, but enough to change the rhythm of everything. The next mortar didn't land where the previous ones had been walking. It splashed wide, as if the hand guiding it had slipped. Enemy fire returned, but it was not the same. Bursts came late. Angles shifted. The tight geometry loosened. The patrol didn't cheer. They didn't even speak. They simply felt the pressure lift, just enough to inhale without tasting panic. Rourke stared into the glare, trying to find the shooter. There was no silhouette, no muzzle flash, no movement, just wind and white, and the sudden sense that someone else had entered the fight. Who? Torres started, then stopped himself. Words didn't matter yet. Rourke's fingers tightened on his rifle. He listened for the next crack, the next clue. Nothing. Only the lingering question that sat in the snow with them. What just saved them? Earlier that morning, the forward staging hut had smelled like wet wool and diesel and a heater that was losing the will to live. Maps were taped to plywood with whatever tape still stuck and cold. Someone had drawn a crude rectangle around their area of operations and written sensor node in block letters as if naming it would make it behave. Outside, the world was already bright, sun hard on ridges, shadows sharp and blue. The kind of day locals loved because the sky promised stability. The kind of day soldiers hated because it promised visibility. Rourke stood over the map with his gloves off, fingertips pressed into the paper as if he could anchor himself. In and out, he said. That's it. We checked the relay node. It's been intermittent. We confirm it's weather or sabotage. We don't fix it. We don't play electrician. We mark it and we leave. Torres raised an eyebrow. So why us? Because we're closest, Rourke said. Because Hire wants eyes on it before the main movement. And because the air corridor closes early. He tapped his watch. Extraction window is tight. Weather can shift. Threat can shift. If we miss it, we're walking. Pike snorted. Walking in this? My knees quit 2 winters ago. Doc rolled her shoulders, checking her med pouch. Any intel on who's been messing with nodes lately? Rourke's gaze flicked to Klein. The older man shrugged, like the question bored him. Same as always. People who want attention. Rourke didn't like that answer. He looked at the stack of recent incident reports pinned by a nail. Short write-ups. grainy screenshots from enemy videos, ambushes filmed from angles that made them look cleaner than they were. Bodies blurred for release. Captions added later. The point wasn't just to win. It was to show winning. Message operations, Rourke said. They want propaganda. They want proof. They want someone important begging on camera. No one liked that. It tightened the room. At the edge of the hut, half in shadow, a small figure checked a rifle with quiet, deliberate movements. Not showy, not nervous, simply methodical. Mag out, chamber check, bowl forward, optic lens wiped with a cloth that looked older than the weapon. Kara Voss didn't join the banter. She didn't lean over the map unless invited. She stood as if she'd learned that occupying too much space made people angry. Rourke noticed her anyway. He always did, because it was his job to notice things other people missed. Voss, he said, nodding toward the map. You're on support. Range cards. Overwatch notes. If we need eyes, you're my eyes. Torres smirked. Translation. She does math while we do walking. Voss didn't react. She simply nodded once and kept checking her gear. Klein's mouth twitched, the start of something ugly. She's 6 inches tall on paper, he said. Torres glanced at him. What's that mean? Klein shrugged. Means the army measured her once and decided she didn't exist. Pike chuckled. Declared dead, right? The hut went still. A joke that wasn't a joke. Voss's hands paused on the rifle for exactly the length of a breath. Then she resumed, calm as before. If the remark hurt, it didn't show. If it didn't hurt, that was worse. Doc shot Klein a look that could have cut rope. Not now. Klein held up a hand. Just saying. Paper ghosts don't help when lead starts flying. Rourke's voice sharpened. Enough. She's on the roster. She's in this unit. That's all that matters. Klein's eyes slid away, but the distrust stayed in the room like cold. Rourke continued, forcing the mission back into shape. Comms plan, primary net, backup net, emergency burst if we get separated. If comms go weird, we don't chase signal. We assume hostile interference. We use hand signals. We stick together. As he spoke, Voss's gaze drifted to the backup radio on the table. The battery indicator blinked, weak. She watched it like she could will it to behave. You see something? Rourke asked quietly when others were busy. Voss hesitated, then spoke softly. Backup battery is not full. Pike scoffed. It's fine. It's always like that. Voss didn't argue. She simply looked back at the map. Rourke lowered his voice. Anything else? She leaned in just enough to point with a gloved finger. Terrain makes sound travel weird, she said. Wind funnels into basin. You'll hear shots late. Also, she traced a spot on the far ridge line. That ridge catches sunlight. Anything metallic, there will flash. If you see flash, it's not snow. Rourke studied the map. You saw something? Not yet, she said. But I will. Outside, the basin awaited, sunlit, open, surrounded by high ground like a bowl meant to collect more than snow. As they geared up, a line on the mission board caught Torres's attention, a note about local movement. A shepherd track cut across the basin, used by a lone herder moving between lower valleys. Civilians? Torres asked. Rourke nodded. We don't know if he's out today, but the track exists. No free fire into that line. Identify. Confirm. Don't get sloppy because the snow makes you feel alone. Doc muttered. Snow never means alone. Voss folded the map copy she'd been given and, before she tucked it away, made a small annotation with a pencil. A thin line along a drift wall and the shadow of a boulder spine, an odd route that hugged low ground in a way that only made sense if you understood how daylight glare erased shapes. Rourke saw the mark. What's that? Voss's eyes stayed on the paper. If you have to move without being seen, she said, that's the only path that might work. Pike snorted. In daylight? In that bowl? No one moves unseen in daylight. Voss didn't look up. Most people don't. Then they stepped off. They moved in file up toward the basin, boots crunching, breath steady, rifle slung but ready. The day was bright enough to make the world feel simple. That was the lie. Rourke walked first, but he felt Voss behind them like a shadow, quiet as drifted snow, eyes not on footprints but on ridges, on tree leans, on the kind of tiny details that got people killed when ignored. By midday, they dropped into the basin. Glare made everything flat. The world looked like a blank page. Every rock shadow could hide a rifle. Every tree line could hide a team. Rourke hated it the way you hate a room you know you've been in during a bad dream. The first warning sign came as a hiccup in his ear, calm squelch, then a brief silence. He checked the handset. The net was there, then it wasn't. Radio check, he said. Nothing but static. He switched channels. Static followed, thick as snow. Torres frowned. That's not weather. No, Rourke agreed. He tried the backup. It blinked, weak, like it was already tired. The indicator dipped. He felt his stomach tighten. Ahead, the sensor sight came into view. A relay mast anchored to rock, wires running down into a small box half buried in snow. Even from a distance, it didn't look right. The mast leaned slightly. The snow around the base was scuffed. Wiring was disturbed in a way wind couldn't do. It's been touched, Doc murmured. Rourke raised a hand for halt. Too late. The first shot cracked and took the radio carrier, Lyle, in the neck. He dropped without sound, as if someone had unplugged him. Blood misted briefly in sunlight, and then became a dark stain on white. The second shot hit Ellis's shoulder as he turned, the impact spinning him sideways. He fell hard, rifle sliding away, and his blood began to soak into the snow like ink. The third shot punched into Nolan, their navigator, shattering his knee. He screamed and collapsed, and the scream echoed in the bowl, a raw human sound swallowed by mountains. Shots aimed at capability, not bodies. Down, Rourke bellowed, and the team dove into the shallow depression like animals seeking a burrow. Rourke landed hard on his forearms, snow packing into his sleeves. He crawled, dragging Nolan by his vest strap, pulling him into whatever little cover existed. Enemy fire didn't flood the depression. It cut the edges. It stitched a line across the lip that kept them pinned. When Pike tried to set his machine gun on the rim, a burst slapped the snow an inch from his fingers and forced him back down. They're controlling us, Torres said, eyes wide. They're not. This isn't. It's a kill box, Rourke said, and the words tasted bitter. The basin was shaped by ridges on three sides and a tree-lean gate behind them. Any retreat meant crossing open snow. Any advance meant climbing into fire. Then the mortars began. The first round landed far. The second corrected. The third walked closer, like the enemy was tapping a finger on the map and saying, here, here, here. They've got observation, Doc said, voice clipped as she pressed on Ellis's wound. Someone is watching. Voss lay at the far edge of the depression, face turned toward the ridges, eyes narrowed. She hadn't fired. She hadn't spoken. She simply watched, as if she were listening with her whole body. Wind shifted and spindrift rose, not enough to hide them, but enough to blind optics and pulses. Every few seconds, the world smeared white, then snapped back into sharp lines. The enemy used the clear moments. Their bursts came when visibility returned, precise as punctuation. Pike's machine gun chewed through belt. Rourke heard the tempo, the hungry rattle, and felt dread. Ammo in this kind of fight was life, and life was finite. Count, Rourke ordered. 2 belts, Pike said. One's partial. Rifles. 2 mags, Torres answered, already digging. Maybe 3 if I'm lucky. Doc didn't speak. She was too busy keeping Ellis from dying. Ellis's blood turned the snow under him into a spreading stain. The color felt obscene against the glare. Nolan tried to sit up and screamed again. Doc shoved him down gently. You move, you bleed more. Overhead, the faint buzz returned. The drone passed in a lazy loop. Rourke fired at it again, a frustrated gesture. The drone didn't care. Then a new constraint arrived like a moral knife. A figure in the shepherd track, far away, moving slowly across the basin. Too distant to confirm who it was. Too real to ignore. Torres swore. Civvy, or bait, Klein whispered. Rourke couldn't shoot into that line. Couldn't risk it. The enemy knew it. They placed their geometry to put that human complication into the patrol's head. Enemy fire paused, then resumed, hurting again, shaping. Not rushing to finish. Tightening. Waiting. Rourke's mind raced, building and discarding plans. Flare? Smoke? Too visible. Rush the sensor sight? Too open. Retreat? Flankers at the tree lean would cut them down. Their comms were strangled. Their overwatch was wounded. Their ammo was bleeding away. Voss shifted slightly, crawling closer to Rourke without raising her profile above the snow. She spoke softly, as if she didn't want the wind to carry her voice. "I can move," she said. Rourke stared at her, incredulous. "In this?" "Yes." Torres barked a laugh. "No offense, Voss, but you stand up and you're a flag in the middle of a white field." Voss didn't look offended. She looked practical. "I won't stand." Klein's eyes narrowed. "We're not sending a ghost to do a job we can't do." Voss's gaze flicked to him, the smallest movement. "I'm not a ghost," she said. Then she looked past him, toward the ridges, toward the places where death sat patiently. Rourke wanted to trust her. He also wanted to live. Those two desires wrestled as mortars walked closer. A round landed, so near the depression shook. Snow collapsed in on them. For a second, everything went white and muffled. When it cleared, Ellis was coughing blood. Doc's voice went sharp. "We're out of time." Rourke checked his watch again. 3 minutes to the extraction window. Less if the air corridor had shifted. He imagined the helicopter pilot listening to a silent net, weighing risk, choosing to stay alive. Another mortar landed, closer still, and Rourke finally felt the tipping point. This wasn't going to hold. He looked at Voss. She was calm, eyes steady. Not fearless. Focused. "Route," he said. She nodded, as if she'd been waiting for permission. "Drift wall," she said. "Boulder shadow." "I marked it," Torres muttered. "Marked it for what?" "A postcard." Voss ignored him. She began stripping weight immediately. Minimal magazines, one small optic, a compact radio set that was already half useless, a single field dressing. No extra anything. No heroic nonsense. Just what mattered. Rourke grabbed her sleeve. "If you go, you don't come back empty," he said. "You take out their eyes. You break their rhythm. You give us breathing room." Voss nodded once. "I know." Klein spat into the snow, anger and fear mixing. "We don't even know if she—" Rourke cut him off. "We do. We know. Shut up and cover sectors." Voss slid over the lip of the depression like she was melting into the basin. She didn't crawl the way most people crawled, pushing and dragging, leaving obvious tracks. She moved almost flush to the surface, elbows and knees doing tiny, controlled shifts. Her profile barely rose above the snow, 6 inches at most, like the cruel joke Klein had made. She became a line, a ripple, a piece of drift. For a moment, Rourke lost her in the glare. It was like watching someone disappear in plain sight. Not magic, not cinematic nonsense. Pure understanding of light, wind, and human attention. Rourke forced himself back to his team. "Pike, conserve." Torres, watch Treeline. "Doc, keep him alive." Doc didn't look up. "Working on it." The basin remained a machine designed to kill them. Enemy bursts kept them pinned. Mortars kept walking. The drone kept circling. Voss moved anyway. She hugged the drift wall she'd marked, the place where wind had piled snow into a raised seam that cast a thin shadow. She stayed in that shadow, using it the way a swimmer uses a current. Each gust of wind became cover. Each mortar thump became a timing cue. She moved on sound as much as sight, knowing the enemy's attention would spike after explosions and drift in the half-beats between. As she crawled, memory surfaced in shards, because the body remembers what paper denies. 5 years earlier, there had been a blast that turned a convoy into a snowstorm of metal. There had been a river ice shelf that shattered under impact. There had been cold water and darkness and weight. There had been the crushing press of ice and snow and the thought, this is where it ends. Except it hadn't. She'd been pinned under a slab, lungs burning, panic clawing, until her fingers found a pocket. 6 inches of air trapped between ice and snow. 6 inches. The difference between a body found and a body missing. She'd breathed that pocket for hours, forcing herself into calm because fear consumed oxygen faster than cold. Above, rescuers had found her blood. Her identification tag. Debris. They'd written her down as a casualty because paperwork needed closure. Declared dead. A clean line in a file. She'd crawled out later, half frozen. Alive in a world that had already moved on. And once a person has been dead on paper, everything afterward becomes a fight to be believed. Now, in the basin, she returned to that same truth, smallness could be survival. Low profile wasn't weakness. It was a weapon. Her optic lens fogged as her breath warmed it. She cursed silently, controlled. She pressed her face away, breathed through a gap in her scarf, and wiped the glass with careful strokes that didn't expose skin shine. Sunlight on skin could flash like metal. Flash could mean death. Overhead, the drone shifted its orbit. Voss froze instantly, becoming nothing. She counted heartbeats. The drone passed. It didn't see what didn't move. That was the trick. Machines looked for change. People looked for patterns. If you became a feature of the landscape, you survived both. She reached a low rock spine, half buried, that rose just enough to break line of sight from the enemy's expected angles. It gave her a narrow sight line upward into the far rocks and toward the sensor site. From here, she wasn't looking down from high ground like a typical threat. She was looking up, an angle most ambushers didn't defend because it felt wrong. She keyed her compact radio, trying a burst on the edge of band, the way you might whisper through a wall. Static answered. Then, faint, broken, something like acknowledgement. Not enough for conversation. Enough to know the signal pressure had shifted. Through her optic, the basin sharpened. She saw the sensor mast, leaned as if tired. She saw wiring disturbed. She saw, tucked behind a rock near the base, a small team with a device that didn't belong, an antenna array angled toward the valley. A jammer. Nearby, slightly higher, she spotted a figure with binoculars and a notepad, body posture wrong for a rifleman. A spotter, the hand guiding mortars, the eyes making the kill box breathe. This wasn't just an ambush. It was a system. Voss settled in, elbows dug into snow, packs supporting the rifle. She slowed her breathing. Inhale, exhale, pause. Triggered discipline. Patience over drama. Behind her, far away, mortars still thumped. The depression still held her team like a clenched fist. The extraction window still ticked down. She didn't rush. Rush shots missed. Missed shots revealed you. Revealed you got you hunted. She chose the first target not because it was satisfying, but because it mattered. The spotter lifted his binoculars again, adjusting, looking toward the depression where her team bled. He was calm, in control. Voss centered him in her optic. She let the wind gust pass, because wind could nudge around. She timed it to a lull, then pressed the trigger like she was pressing a button. The rifle cracked once. The spotter folded, binoculars dropping into snow. In the basin, the next mortar landed wrong. Wide, confused. The rhythm stuttered. The machine faltered. Voss didn't watch him fall. She was already scanning for the next piece of the system. The jammer operator crouched near the antenna device, head down, hands adjusting dials. He didn't look like a fighter. He looked like a technician. That made him more dangerous. Voss waited for him to lean into a position that exposed more than a helmet. When he did, she fired again. One clean shot. The operator dropped backward, the antenna array tilting as if suddenly heavy. The static pressure in Voss's earpiece changed. Not full clarity, jamming didn't vanish like magic, but it loosened enough that a short burst might slip through. She keyed the radio and sent what mattered, not what she wanted. Low ridge, she transmitted clipped. Trilene flankers moving. Mortars off. Move on my mark. On the far side of the basin, she could almost imagine Rourke hearing her. Surprise, relief, then immediate decision. She shifted her optic to the Trilene gate. There, an RPG team, tube angled toward the likely extraction corridor, waiting to deny any helicopter approach or finish anyone who broke from the depression. Force multiplier. Voss didn't aim for the man's chest. Chest shots were forgiving. She aimed for the tube, the hands, the confidence. She fired once. The RPG man jerked, the tube slipping. The second man hesitated, suddenly aware that they were being watched from somewhere they couldn't see. Their confidence cracked. They scrambled backward into cover, losing their setup. In the depression, Rourke's team moved for the first time not as trapped animals, but as soldiers with an opening. Rourke threw a hand signal, shortbound. Torres and Pike dragged Ellis and Nolan toward a fold in the terrain that gave slightly better cover. Doc moved with them, never letting pressure off the wound. Snow sprayed as they slid, bullets snapping overhead. But the enemy fire was no longer clean. It was frantic, reactive. The enemy realized the system was being dismantled. They adapted fast, because competent enemies do. Voss saw it in the shift of movement patterns. A pair of climbers peeled off from the higher rocks, moving along the spine toward her position, low and quick. The drone tightened its orbit, dipping lower, searching. A flanking team on the tree line began sweeping toward the low ridge where her shots had come from, not because they knew exactly where she was, but because they understood the geometry now. Threat from below meant someone had found an angle they hadn't defended. Voss's rifle felt heavier in the cold. The action stiffened slightly. A round fed sluggishly, almost sticking. She cleared it with a controlled motion, silent, refusing to let frustration become noise. Shots peppered the rocks around her as the enemy sprayed, likely angles. Stone chips flicked into snow. One snapped past her cheek, close enough that she felt its passage like a slap. Her body wanted to rise, to move, to sprint. Panic always wanted speed. She stayed 6 inches. Flattened. Still. Letting rounds crack over her rather than presenting a silhouette. The climbers moved closer, using the spine like cover. The drone buzzed tighter, like an angry insect. Voss scanned for the last piece of cohesion. Whoever was directing them. Whoever had decided to pause fire earlier, waiting for a signal. Whoever had built this trap to tighten and hold rather than finish. Then she saw him. He stepped into view near the sensor site, taller than the others, moving with the certainty of authority. He gestured sharply, an arm slicing, a hand pointing, a posture that said, "I own this moment." He wasn't just a shooter. He was a coordinator. The brain that turned separate weapons into a single tightening noose. Near him, Voss saw something else. An extra figure holding a camera rig, lens pointed toward the depression. Not for targeting, for recording. So that was it. Not just death. A film capture. A propaganda prize. A live operator dragged in a frame, forced to speak, forced to prove a narrative. Voss's throat tightened with cold and anger. She pushed it down. Anger could be useful, but only if it didn't speed your heartbeat too much. The commander lifted a hand again, as if about to signal the final close. If he gave that signal, flankers would rush, mortars would bracket tighter, the drone would dip to confirm, and the depression would become a grave. Voss steadied her breathing. Inhale. Exhale. Pause. She pressed the trigger. The rifle cracked, sharp and isolated, the same clean sound Rourke's team had heard as a mystery in the basin. The commander dropped, as if the ground had pulled him down. His gestures ended midair. The people around him hesitated, suddenly leaderless. Bursts of gunfire became frantic and uncoordinated. The kill box lost its rhythm. The system lost its brain. In the depression, Rourke felt it instantly. The pressure changed. The enemy's angles shifted wrong. The mortar cadence broke. The tight geometry loosened into chaos. Move! Rourke roared, and for the first time his voice carried something like certainty. Torres threw a smoke canister not as a wall, but as a distraction, wind dragging the cloud sideways. Pike laid a short, controlled burst, not to win a firefight, but to keep heads down for 3 seconds. Doc and Nolan hauled Ellis, boots slipping, bodies heavy, breath burning. Rourke keyed his radio again. Static but thinner now. He forced a burst through. Rook actual. Contact. Need pickup. He didn't know if anyone heard. He didn't have time to care. He popped the signal panel briefly, low angle, then yanked it back down. A gamble that the bird was listening on any channel it could. Voss watched them move through her optic, tiny figures against a bright world. She wanted to rise and run to them. She couldn't yet. The counter hunt was still moving toward a ridge. The drone dipped lower, searching. The climbers were closer now, their movement careful, disciplined. They weren't panicked. They were angry and focused. Voss slid backward from her firing position, still low, still 6 inches, using the rock spine as a shield. She moved in tiny increments, timing her shifts to bursts of gunfire from the basin. She kept her profile flat, her tracks minimal. She backfilled snow behind her with a gloved hand, erasing the darker line that would betray her path. A round cracked into the rock above her, showering grit. She didn't flinch. Flinching made movement. Movement drew eyes. She reached a shallow dip behind the spine and lay still, letting the enemy sweep past her previous position. She heard boots crunch on snow. Close now. A voice muttered in a language she didn't speak, angry, confused. Another voice answered, sharper. The drone buzz hovered, then drifted on. Voss waited until the sound moved away, then began crawling again. Not toward the depression, but toward a line that would intersect the extraction lane. She had to rejoin without drawing the counterhunt into her team's path. In the basin, the helicopter arrived not as a triumphant rescue, but as a calculated risk. It came low, using the valley line, rotors thumping cold air that flattened snow. It hovered just long enough, seconds, not minutes. Rourke's team surged, dragging wounded, hauling gear, moving like people who understood the cost of hesitation. Pike was last, machine gun slung, head down, teeth bared against wind and fear. Doc shoved Ellis up into the aircraft first. Nolan followed, grimacing. Torres climbed, turning to grab Pike's hand. Rourke stayed on the ground half a second longer, scanning for Voss. She wasn't there. His stomach dropped. He imagined the worst, because that was what war taught you to imagine. Then, from the side, a figure rose only enough to be seen, moving like a shadow on snow. Voss ran the last few meters in a low crouch, rifle tight, face pale with cold. She didn't wave. She didn't shout. She simply arrived. Rourke grabbed her vest and hauled her into the aircraft. The Dorganer didn't ask questions. The helicopter lifted immediately, banking away as rounds snapped up from below. Inside, the cabin was a roar of rotors and breathing and the wet, metallic smell of blood. It was cramped. It was cold. It was alive. Ellis lay on the floor, Doc's hand still on his wound, her face tense. Nolan gripped the bench, jaw clenched, trying not to scream. Pike leaned against the wall, eyes closed, counting breaths like they were ammunition. Torres stared at Voss, as if he couldn't reconcile what he'd seen with what he believed. Klein, pale and shaken, finally broke the silence. "That shot," he said, voice rough. "That was you." Voss didn't answer at first. She was catching her breath, letting her hand stop shaking. Fear didn't vanish because you did your job. It waited until the job was done, then demanded payment. Rourke sat opposite her, knees braced. He watched her with a mixture of relief and something else, respect that had been earned in the only currency that mattered out there. "How?" Torres demanded, unable to let it go. "From where?" "We didn't see anything." Voss looked down at her gloves. "Low ridge," she said simply. Pike shook his head, incredulous. "In daylight snow?" Voss lifted her eyes. They were steady now. "In daylight snow," she repeated. The helicopter's roar filled the space between them, and with it came that strange post-fight calm, the quiet that isn't peace, just absence of immediate threat. Back at the staging area, the debrief room was warmer, but the heat didn't reach inside bones that had been in the basin. Wet gear hung from hooks. Boots steamed. The unit sat with paper cups of burnt coffee, hands trembling slightly as adrenaline drained. On the table, someone had placed the recovered device from near the sensor site, an antenna array, improvised but effective. A jammer. Beside it, a small memory card pulled from the enemy camera rig, sealed in an evidence bag. Rourke stood at the front, while an intel officer from higher took notes. "They tampered with the relay node," Rourke said. "Sent a false status ping. Made it look intermittent. Drew us in on a predictable route." The intel officer nodded, expression grim. "A baited verification. Not just an ambush," Doc added, voice tight. "They were hurting. Waiting." Rourke pointed at the evidence bag. "Camera handler. Restraint kit. They intended a live capture. Propaganda. And intel. They wanted one of us on record. And they wanted our upcoming movements." The intel officer's pen paused. "Upcoming movements." Rourke's gaze hardened. "That node sits on the edge of the corridor for the larger operation. If they captured someone and pulled details, it would compromise everything." Torres swallowed. "So we weren't the target. We were the lure." "Close," Rourke said. "We were the first prize. The larger prize was what we knew." The intel officer turned slightly toward Voss. Your shots disrupted their system, he said. Spotter first, then jammer. That's textbook. Boston Basque. She simply nodded. Klein shifted uncomfortably, then cleared his throat. So what about the commander? He asked. The one she dropped. Rourke's eyes narrowed. That was the turning point, he said. When he went down, their cohesion broke. They started fighting like individuals, not like a plan. The intel officer's pen moved again. We'll confirm identity. But their intent is clear. This was designed to win without chaos. Control comms, control observation, control movement, then close for capture when the moment was perfect. Doc exhaled slowly, until the brain got removed. Silence settled, the kind that comes when everyone realizes how close they were. Rourke's gaze drifted to Voss. She sat a little apart, not because anyone had ordered it, but because habits were hard to break. She held her coffee with both hands like it was warmth and anchor. The intel officer flipped a page. There's another matter, he said, tone shifting. Your record. Voss's posture tightened, almost imperceptible. Your casualty file, he continued. It was never properly reconciled. You were listed as declared dead. Klein muttered under his breath, as if the words tasted different now. The intel officer nodded. Declared dead. Because only your tag and blood were recovered. No body. No confirmation. A clean closure on paper. Voss's eyes stayed on her cup. Paper likes clean, she said softly. Rourke spoke before anyone else could. She was alive, he said. She is alive. She saved this patrol. The intel officer held up a placating hand. No one is disputing that, he said quickly. This will be corrected. Voss's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Corrected, she repeated. Like a typo. Torres looked uncomfortable, guilt and admiration mixing. What's the 6 inches thing? He asked, quieter now. Klein kept saying it like a curse. Voss stared at the table for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, but the words carried weight. 5 years ago, she said, a blast broke river ice. Snow collapsed. I went under. They found my tag. They found blood. They didn't find me. I was pinned under ice and snow. There was an air pocket, about this much. She held her hands apart, small distance. 6 inches. That's what I breathed. The room went still. Even Klein's face softened, the cruelty draining out of him as reality replaced rumor. I stayed alive by staying small, Voss continued. By not fighting the weight. By not wasting air on panic. I learned what stillness can do. She glanced up, eyes meeting Rourke's for a beat. It works in snow. It works in fights. It's not magic. It's a choice. Doc's voice softened. And then they told you were dead. Voss nodded once. They didn't tell me. They told paper. Paper told everyone else. Rourke leaned forward, elbows on knees. Being alive on paper isn't the hard part, he said gently. Voss's gaze flicked to him, surprised by the understanding. The hard part, Rourke continued, is being alive in the room, with people who decided your story without you. Klein swallowed hard. His hands, usually steady, fidgeted. I was wrong, he said, voice rough. It didn't sound like an apology he'd practiced. It sounded like something torn out of him by truth. I talked like you were a rumor. Voss looked at him. For a second, the room held its breath, waiting to see if she would cut him or forgive him. She didn't do either. I don't need you to like me, she said. I need you to trust sectors and timing. Today you did. Klein nodded, eyes down. Yes, he whispered. The intel officer cleared his throat, uncomfortable with emotion. We'll update the record, he said, and we'll push this up the chain. Your actions prevented a capture, possibly prevented compromise of the larger operation. Voss didn't react to praise. Praise was a sound that evaporated in wind. What mattered was what stayed when the wind stopped. Later, when a room emptied and gear was stowed and the base settled back into routine, Rourke found Voss outside, near the edge of the compound where the snowbank rose like a wall and the mountains loomed in quiet indifference. The sky was still bright, but the sun had shifted, shadows stretching longer, the day moving toward colder. Voss stood alone, looking out toward the direction of the basin. From here, it was just a white seam between ridges. Peaceful again, as if it had never tried to kill them. Rourke approached without crunching too hard, giving her space. "You okay?" he asked, knowing it was a foolish question and asking anyway because it mattered. Voss's breath fogged briefly, then vanished. "I'm here," she said. Rourke nodded. "That's not nothing." She was quiet for a long moment, then spoke in a voice barely louder than wind. "When you're declared dead," she said, "people stop looking for you. They stop making room for you. You come back and you're inconvenient." Rourke frowned. "You're not inconvenient." Voss's eyes stayed on the distant ridges. "Today," she said. "Today I wasn't." Rourke leaned on the snowbank beside her. "You were the difference," he said. "Not the paperwork. Not the jokes. You." Voss didn't smile, but something in her shoulders eased like a strap loosened. They stood in silence, not awkward, not forced, just two people watching a landscape that didn't care about their stories. Finally, Voss spoke again, and this time the words landed like the last round of the day, clean and final. "Tracks disappear," she said, nodding toward the mountains. "Wind takes them. Snow fills them. You could look at that basin tomorrow and think nothing happened." Rourke followed her gaze. He imagined the depression, now empty, the blood stains covered by drift, the spent casings buried, evidence erased. "But something happened," he said. Voss nodded once. "What saves you," she said, "doesn't always leave a mark." Rourke looked at her, understanding that this wasn't just about the basin. It was about being the person who did the work and then vanished into the white again. About being underestimated until the moment you couldn't be ignored. He didn't try to give her a speech. He didn't try to wrap it up in something neat. He simply stood beside her as the day cooled and the mountains held their quiet, and somewhere out in the bright snowfield that had almost swallowed them, wind erased the last signs of violence, leaving behind only the truth that mattered. A ghost had been there, and a single unseen shot had decided the battle.